Hey everyone, and good afternoon or good morning. I'm Dave Crossan from NBC Universal, and I'm the president this year of C2HR. We've got a lot of exciting programs planned for 2021, and we're kicking off this year with what I think is going to be a really fascinating webinar. So thank you for joining us. As many of you know a lot about C2HR, and we're able to offer a lot of quality programs to our members, of which all of our HR professionals at our member companies participate. And these are done free of charge, thanks to the generous support of the C2HR champions you see here: Cable Center, Charter Communications, Comcast, NBCU, and WarnerMedia, and all of our sponsors. And I'd like to give a special shout out today to JM Search and Talmetrix, who've sponsored today's webinar. So thank you to everybody behind all of that. Another perk that you have as members of C2HR is our access to our HR Knowledge Center at c2hr.org. It's a curated collection of more than 500 timely articles on the most popular HR topics, including talent management. And I'd invite you to check it out after today's webinar. This is a really great resource. And going forward, we'll announce a number of virtual networking roundtables this year. For 2021, our C2HR conference will be a virtual event, and we'll give you the dates of that soon. And again, more programs in the coming weeks. So please look out for any promotion of activities, and we look forward to engaging with you all over the course of the year. So to today's session, we're really excited to have a first-class panel to speak to you about this fascinating topic, and very timely as well. So our featured speakers are Chris Powell, who's the president of Talmetrix; Karen Bennett, who's the EVP and Chief People Officer at Cox Communications; Julie Neimat, EVP of Employee Experience and HR Operations for Discovery; and Christopher Strazzella, who's the Global Head of Talent Acquisitions for WarnerMedia. So just simply on the titles alone, you can tell we have a heavy-hitting group here, but I know many of these individuals, and I think their contribution here is going to be excellent, and really looking forward to this discussion based on the wealth of knowledge the group has and the timeliness of the topic. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Chris, who's going to get things started and will be moderating the conversation. So here you go, Chris.
Dave, thanks for the warm welcome, and also, again, congratulations to you on assuming the leadership role for C2HR. I know we're going to be in good hands going forward, so looking forward to what the rest of the year brings. And to my panelists, super excited to have all three of you, Julie, Christopher, and Karen. We are excited to engage in a conversation around the talent mindset for the future of work. And I'm going to just kind of frame up for everybody kind of the run of show for our chat today with you on this topic. And we're going to touch on, oftentimes you hear people talking about the future of work. It's a hot topic. You can't pick up a magazine, a book, or an article that's not talking about it. But then now, with all the things that are happening in the world and in our community and in our country and our businesses, we also want to make sure that we ladder up and talk about, hey, what's happening with the future of business with all the changes we're seeing from COVID to social justice to climate, you name it. There's a whole lot of things that are influencing what happens for the future of business. And then we'll move into talking about what are the implications for the future of work. But the really exciting piece that I'm extremely excited to talk about with this group, this panelist, is around the talent mindset. What are the skills, behaviors, and attributes that are going to be essential as the future of business and the future of work continue to evolve? What does that mean for us as humans, in the world of talent? And you'll hear from Karen and Julie and Christopher, kind of their point of view, and I'll throw in hopefully a smart comment here and there to add to the conversation around what they're seeing, not only in their organizations, but at large. And because many of you on this webinar are HR professionals, we're also going to touch on, hey, what do we need to do from our role in our positions as the HR mindset to be able to support this ever so dynamic space that we play in. One of the things I often talk about are organizations are dynamic human systems, which basically means they're constantly evolving. And so this is why this is a timely topic for us today. And according to one of our famous leaders in the world, Mahatma Gandhi, he has a quote that says, "The future depends on what you do today." And so as we know, today is as dynamic as I've ever seen it in my career. And so we're going to just jump into the conversation. And so again, Karen, Christopher, Julie, you ready? All right, let's rock and roll. To get us started here, you know, back to the opening piece, right? The future of business. About 2 years ago, we had Bob Johansson from Institute for the Future really lay out the new leadership literacies that are impacting the future of business with all the forecast things that he was talking about, which really got me prompted to think about, all right, what does that mean and what does that look like today? And it's 2021. And so Karen, Chris, or Christopher, or Julie, I will throw it up and ask, you know, as you look at what's happening in the world in terms of all the things impacting us, how are you seeing these factors or these experiences or events influencing the future of business from your perspective? I'll let it be a jump ball.
I'm happy to join in. So hi, everyone. And thanks for joining. So I am Nostradamus. I will not ever profess I can predict the future. But in terms of how we operate the business, I think we're in a unique position to look at everything through a new lens. And we have to take advantage of that, right? So we know that the rate of change in the world has never been as fast as it is now, and it will never be slower. We know this, right? The media business, as we all know, has been evolving at a dizzying pace. And in some cases, the changes were accelerated by the opportunities that chaos brought us, right? So whether we look at this as positive or negative, sometimes it varies by day or by person, but we do need to look at these as opportunities. So, you know, when the pandemic hit last year, we're still thinking about this, right? But we thought we were going to be working from home for a spell, like a long snow day or something. That's what we thought initially. None of us predicted how long we were going to be out of the office, right? And we didn't necessarily change how we work fundamentally. We just adapted, you know, with our technology or our connection tools, right? Just to replicate our work days and do the stuff we did before, but in a different space. And, you know, we didn't do a great job at it, and we can all talk about the impacts to ourselves, but we're now coming in 10 ago, and we're looking at a future where working from home and working differently in some fashion is going to be part of our new normal work patterns going forward. And we need to figure out how to do it better. You know, I think we need to look, and beyond all that, like, what is the work we need to do? You know, work. How do we do it and where? And when I say where, I'm not just talking about home or office, but I'm really talking about like new locations, right? Possibly opening our doors to more diversity in our workforce and giving us access to different pools of talent. I can talk about this for days. You know, I'd love to, you know, get Karen and Christopher's thoughts as well.
Oh, thank you, Julie. I'll just build on some of the things you said. If I take it even closer to home, and if I think of the industry that we all share in common, it's our future of our business has been informed by how people have had to operate over the last 12 to 13 months, right? We've had hundreds of thousands of new customers sign on to ensure that they have broadband access because they are educating their kids from home, they're working from home, etc. I think all of us recognized in the times that we needed to shelter in place that content from programmers that join us on this call has never been more essential to keep people occupied and having something outside of work and school to do in the confines of their home. So there has been a very clear consumer expectation set of us. If we didn't already know it, it is absolutely been exponential in the last 12 or 13 months as to what we need to be providing back for dare I say, the foreseeable future, right? We're not ever going to snap back to what it was. There was a new normal, as Julie called it. We refer to it as the next normal, with a little bit of uncertainty in my voice because we don't know what that means, but it's been very clear what consumers think that needs to be from us.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of also, when we talk about the rate of acceleration of different business models that some were in play and some were in response. And so, when we talk in the virtual or digital walls at WarnerMedia, we've accelerated our entire business from putting the fans first and moving our entire slate of films that are traditionally in theatrical experience for the consumer. All 18 this year will go to a dual distribution model between in theater as well as in home on our platform. That would have never happened prior. I mean, there's been conversations and discussions around it. There's been tons of analysts and consultants that have looked at the different models, different distribution. But I will say that because of, as Karen mentioned, consumer behavior and consumer interest completely shifted our business. And I think you put it in a great way, Karen. It's not a snap back. When the pandemic is over, and I'm not a predictor, but it will be over, everything is shifted. And so whether it's work from home, whether it's being 100% remote office location, Julie talked about location strategy. We've played in certain markets from a media, technology, and entertainment perspective. There's an opportunity to play in other markets that aren't traditionally known to have media circles or entertainment circles or even technology circles. So what does that actually mean for us from our workforce perspective? And so just the rapid acceleration has, again, forced us to change, but there is a lot of silver lining that is actually on the horizon. And so I think we've seen the benefits, but obviously there's been a lot of challenges that we've all had to work through, both as individuals, as leaders, and as teams. And so the pace, though, has just been mind-blowing is probably a word. Some say exhausting, but also as well, too, we've all built new muscles along the way, too. So.
Love all of that, right? So if I could string it together, right? So we've talked about accelerated pace, which is driving change to the next normal, Karen. I'll take that from you, right? And so in that, there's a whole lot of things that are shifting. And even in that conversation, as we're talking about business, the changes and to the future of business, the mindset of leaders, right? To be able to even start to think and create, back to Christopher's point, picking up new skills and competencies to be able to operate in such a dynamic marketplace where, I know from running this business that, I do a forecast 12 to 24 months. Now I'm like, I don't know if I can forecast past 3 months, let alone try to figure out where things are going, 12 months from now. So really fascinating. And Julie, I really want to pick up on this whole idea, right? You tapped into it around new strategies around talent, where to find talent from a business strategy standpoint. I mean, it opened up a huge opportunity for a lot of the organizations on this call that even rethink and reimagine those efforts around that. But really, really key point. Anything else you would dial in on that conversation around location strategies?
Well, just I guess a little more on that point. I think, in terms of geography, many companies are, reducing their real estate footprints as opportunity, right? But also looking at, talent pools outside of their 50-mile radius. But we're seeing some companies augment pay for people moving to lower cost locations and others keeping it flat. So I'm not sure how this is going to play out in a bigger scale, but I'm like literally watching this with a bucket of popcorn, right? Because both solutions are fraught with a lot of change and challenge and impact. Interesting challenge for us all to have. And I don't know that we have enough knowledge to see how this is going to play, especially when we're talking about people offshoring, like me, like I want to go work in India. What happens? Can I keep my pay? And some companies are saying, yeah. So that obviously disrupts the ecosystem in that market. But it's fascinating. And certainly we talk about it all the time. And we're anticipating a lot of folks wanting just to move out of a high cost location to a lower cost location, but also start hiring in lower cost locations or just different locations, right? There's some markets I was talking to the team the other day about this location in Florida where we've got all kinds of talent that are they're in a slower recovery world, right? They're an industry. They're in the travel and tourism, which is going to recover a little later than some of our others. And there's huge talent right there hanging out. And there's a few companies looking at them, but it's interesting and there's so much to learn. So I'm watching.
Yeah, and listen, I'll share that popcorn with you as well too, just because when we think about before, there are companies that always had some sort of flexible component to their work, right? But a lot of it was predominantly based in office, those in-office experiences. And so now we're actually looking at 3 different type of constructs, both in office, the hybrid model of maybe 60-40, like 60% in office, 40% remote, or flip, and then 100% remote. And so then when companies are now committing to 100% remote, reducing their capital expenditures, their real estate footprint, then we as companies say, how do we compete with that when we actually have either that physical office presence or that hybrid model, or are we giving employees all 3 of those options? And then who do you actually offer that to? What does that look like? What is that experience? What is that interconnectivity between the teams? How does that actually impact some individual teams and some of the larger teams? And so, you now have to compete against a different subset of companies that may have not been your competitors at first, but because they have that benefit of like, I want to be 100% remote, then what is it actually? Then what do you do? Like, how do you pivot, and what do you offer to kind of either counteract that or complement it?
It'll be interesting how it plays out, right? Because you're right. Suddenly the world in which we compete for talent is exponential. It has given us all the opportunity, each of us personally, to say we want a differentiated or a personalized experience about how we return to work, and not just in the period of time when it is safe to start trickling in, but for the longer term. I mean, I think the expectations have been reset. I imagine each of our companies have found themselves as productive, maybe even more productive, despite the fact we haven't been in the office. And so I think that does put a new dimension on what it means to have an employee experience that is stellar in each one of our companies. We're having to kind of figure that out. If it's hybrid, which is what Christopher speaks to, if it is some of the companies we've known that said they're solely remote. I think with that, and I don't know the answers to it either, I think with that is the trade-off that comes with, does that in some way erode the culture that you left, or create a new culture that could be as vibrant or even more so than the one that you had? But for many of us, I think that's our secret sauce of our companies. It's not, frankly, our real estate footprint. It is about what it is to interact and collaborate. And we've traditionally done that in person. And so that's the unknown that comes with some of these decisions that we're all making. But I think we're all in the same boat of navigating it.
Yeah, and Karen, to your point, that's a really interesting point when you start to talk about the employee experience that's associated with the future of work, and then what's the implication of culture. And I know, Julie, you and I had a earlier discussion around that piece, in particular around culture, because when you think about, we've all experienced this, and this is the phrase that our lived experiences. We've all lived through this moment of, all right, what's the impact from an employee experience standpoint, a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, and culture? When you think about all of these things as we get ready to move into the conversation around the mindset needed, but how are all of these things impacting the work, right? Is there any observations? And Karen, I also keep in mind that you mentioned that there's no crystal ball here, right? So what are you seeing or experiencing, or at least pondering or working through in your respective organizations around that intersection of employee experience, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and culture relative to the future of work?
I will tell you, we probably all have this same opportunity. We're navigating as we go, but one thing that I continually think about is we hired at Cox Communications over 1,000 people in the past year, most of whom never entered one of our offices, never had a person-to-person exchange with their prospective leader or the recruiter or the team that helped onboard them. And yet they are vibrant and they are excelling and they are learning our company. So there's a gold mine right there. I think we all probably have that. What is it to have been solely the virtual employee? And what is it that we can learn from that to bring forward in this next normal? That's something we really want to explore a little further of how has that been? Because the need to collaborate is no less. It's just the format in which you do it. The need to establish boundary partners and relationships with those that you work with most closely, that didn't change. Again, it's just the footprint in which we do it. So I think that there's a lot that we can learn from, I call it the cohort of the pandemic that we all brought on board in our companies about what really works well and be able to contrast that with what were some things that we thought were table stakes in our culture prior to all moving remote.
Great insight.
Yeah, and just kind of add to that, when we talk about equity and inclusion and culture, and this new dynamic that we're working amongst, I think what we've learned is more about each other, and not just from a professional perspective, but from a personal perspective. Because when you think about when you're home and you think about someone knocking at your door, scratching at your door like your dog needs to go out, or actually, a loved one or a partner, or the multitude of things in our own personal life that are now just at our conference room door, right? And you've only had that via a text maybe, or something on your phone that pings you and said, I got to jump out real quick, right, to take this. Now it's surrounding us throughout our days. And so you then start thinking about storytelling, and then you start to think about what's that person's individual story. And, when we talk about then what's the business imperative of storytelling, how do we have diverse and authentic and inclusive and equitable voices in our storytelling that goes out to our consumers, that our employees are producing or touching. And so, within this little box here, I've learned more about my team than I ever have if I was probably sitting around a conference table, or maybe going to a happy hour or doing some sort of an offsite. And so that for me has been a big shift in culture. But also when we think about diversity and inclusion, you always talk about showing up as your authentic self. Like, there shouldn't be two Christophers, right? There shouldn't be Christopher at WarnerMedia, and there shouldn't be Christopher, on the weekends. Like, we want you to be your whole self through and through. And now we're actually seeing it on a daily basis on all the calls. So I found that a fascinating type of experience.
Yeah, Christopher, I agree. Like there was such a different humanity that we saw, the best and the worst, right? We saw last year. But I do think, we're in a big way, the world is still in a panic mode. So I do think we're going to see culture change quite a bit. And there's going to be expectation for more transparency, yes, for more collaboration. We have to fail faster. We have to innovate in a different way. It's exciting, but it's going to require us to listen. I'm desperate for Monday to happen. I'm pushing out an engagement survey, where we want to ask everyone, how are you doing? Give us more feedback. And then we're going to, continue to evolve our program. As much as we would love to say we know what people want, we have to ask them and get them involved in changing. And I don't know, I do get excited by all of these new companies that are coming out of nowhere. They're harassing me, and probably all of you too, with like, hey, listen to my pitch. But every once in a while I'll see something, I'm like, whoa, that is what we need. And there's some really cool ones popping up supporting mental health. And I'm madly in them. We can talk if anyone's interested. And it's just a really different way to look at how to take care of people in a way that's not kind of heavy and big. It's very accessible and tech-based, app-based or whatever. So I mean, and the concept of culture, I just think there's so much ahead of us. I think it's delicate. I think it's, it's as much as, years ago we would say, the future was all about the war for talent, and talent was, leading the conversation about culture, but I think it's all of it now, right? It's the company, it's the environment, it's the world, politics, all of this, and I think it's for us all to get a lot better.
This is all great and fascinating piece, because I know some of the work that we see on our side at the Talmetrix when working with our client partners is really around this whole work around looking at the intersection of culture and diversity, equity, and inclusion and the work itself. Like how do things need to morph? And what's fascinating is that we're seeing a lot of companies think about, all right, how do I anchor all of this? And so this is what's really interesting. When you start to talk about culture, we're really talking about what are those behaviors that are going to drive the success of the organization in terms of creating what I call a container, creating that thing that we call culture. Like, what are those elements that create that? And we're looking at companies exploring how to tie and anchor their diversity, equity, and inclusion, because the level of change that's there required to get to an inclusive culture goes back to behavior, which touches on culture. And then when you talk about, Julie, you're getting ready to run an engagement survey. There too, you're talking about those factors that influence performance, productivity, retention, experience around concepts like empowerment and communication. All of those things start to shape how people show up for work. But then we get into the really important space around what's that mindset, that talent that we all are looking for in this changing dynamic to help grow and expand and create sustainable and thriving organizations. And so I want to shift and get into the conversation around talent mindset and talk about what we're seeing there. But before I do that, I want to remind our folks that are participating with us in this webinar, don't forget to, if you've got questions for us, please put them in the chat box. We would love to hear from you. We're going to save some time at the end to take Q&A. And so we would love to hear from you and answer your questions as they come through. But as we get ready, we're going to shift to talk about talent mindset. And so we've all, Julie, you mentioned it earlier, there's a lot of conversation around, employee well-being and belongingness and connectedness. It's constantly evolving given the unique environment that we're having to perform and do work these days. So as you all are, as leaders in your respective businesses and as individuals too as well, I mean, what are you seeing as those skills and attributes and behaviors that are helping shape and inform the go-forward talent mindset that you think you need more of, to meet the opportunities and challenges that we see coming in the next new normal? Oh, I messed up. Next normal, not next new normal, next normal.
Chris, it's funny. I was talking about my first career earlier, but honestly, I think what best prepared me for life was my first career as a reporter, which, I went to college, but my college professors in journalism school were all field reporters, and they took us out in the field. They took me to prison. I had to cover death row inmates, interviewing them in a prison, right? I drove around in cop cars, but it was like this, they sent me out there with nothing, and they're like, write the story, find the story. And it was I learned to be scrappy and fast and working in the opaque and being terrified. I was a sports reporter for a little while, and I would have, oh my God, I'm going to age myself, but I would have to drive from the story to the station and type my story up like crazy. But I say this because like the coaches didn't want to talk to me. I had to write a story. I came up with stuff, and it was, it was in a big way, we see some of these skills pop, and certainly for me, it's figuring out how to work in the opaque, tolerating ambiguity, and sometimes even thriving in the unclear environment. Some people, all seen them on our teams, they just came out of nowhere, and they're like, okay, it's like an ER doc, right? Okay, I got this, whatever the orders they shout around, but building teams, like your team is not necessarily the people who sit under you or next to you. They're people who can augment the stuff you need to do, or who can help you figure stuff out, right? And I noticed a lot across last year, there are some people who kind of stayed in their spot waiting to be, given a direction. Like, I'm not sure what to do. Maybe I'm going to hold the program or whatnot. And there's others who are like, oh my God, what can I do? I actually noticed someone on the call today who always asks me like, hey, what do you need? What can I do? And those are that's the mindset of the future. People who are going to look at problem solving. And Chris had sent around this really great article. Chris, I'd love you to talk about that, because one of the things that really caught me was, just thinking differently. And it's like it's important it's important to challenge how we think and how we solve problems.
Just to build on a little of that, I think we have found we require more empathy for those that are leading others, right? So we can talk about the skill of managing a remote team. That's not really the skill. It is the behavior that a leader is bringing forward to recognize we are going to have lawn service show up when we're in the middle of our presentation, that we are going to have a screaming kid or a barking dog, that this is the reality that we all experience. And being empathetic to what those needs are, particularly when the school year first closed down for so many that are parents, and they found themselves having to be on a Zoom call at the same time that it was time for the math test, and how to navigate those things. And so it really began to crystallize pretty early on to us that having empathy from our leaders was paramount. And then, of course, having it for each other, not just from our leadership, but it really became a skill that eclipsed a lot of the others that we would normally ask from our leaders. And I go where Julie goes too about this idea of being able to pivot, having agility, and recognize, you know what, we had a plan, we got to scrap that plan because now everything foundational to that plan changed. And being okay with that. It is of being able to master ambiguity. I think you say that really well. And we say, how does that show up? It shows up as being agile and being able to kind of pivot or, change as things anticipate that you'll need to change. It's been things that have really shown up as being what makes people successful in this environment, and being able to go with the uncertainty that still exists in this environment.
Yeah, and just, on that, I think every one of us have worked in that very gray area, but then how do you actually then operationalize something, right? To move it forward. And so, there's been like this maniacal sense of urgency. So we talk about speed, because everything's moving so fast now, right? There's lack of downtime in physical movement between office locations or getting on a plane and going to a meeting or a conference. So we no longer have what I'll just call those physical distractions, right? And so then your speed, your amount of time is actually, there's this the quiet kind of expectation that we all feel, and we know it's there because our clients, our competitors are moving with that same speed. But then how do you then not sacrifice quality? Like, how do you stand for quality? And what does that actually mean to your organization? Are you putting the customer, the consumer, or the fan at the very center of that, and then working backwards? And then when it becomes gray, then how do you prioritize? So how do you prioritize in that area where, you first had these three goals, and then all of a sudden that didn't work out and you had to shift really quickly. So then that ambition along with that priority, where does that fit into your day? And so I think those are all things. And Karen, when you talk about differing perspectives, it's really about inviting and amplifying them, right? And so how do you do that in a way that makes people feel that authenticity and how they are showing up and what's actually happening in their lives? And Karen, I think you said it best. I mean, we've seen empathy in leaders really come out as a leading behavior, as opposed to being that super ambitious, get it all done type of assertive leader, not aggressive. And so, it's just, you see people demonstrating all sorts of different behaviors in this new kind of culture and mindset.
What's fascinating, what's fascinating in this conversation, right? We've heard increased levels or attributes around humanity and empathy and adaptability. I think many of you are probably familiar with the book Carol DeWitt wrote some years ago about mindset and psychology of success, where she talks about she compares a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And we had some pre-dialogue about that. And if you're familiar with the phrase VUCA, which was coined some years ago, where you talk about things from a volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, being more of a fixed mindset, but VUCA from a growth mindset is looking at vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. And even we started to discuss, yeah, agility is great, but really what agility is morphing into and evolving into is adaptability. And so that was one of the things that we as a panel kind of just debated and went into further conversation. And so if you think about the level of, and excuse me for the word, of intimacy that we now have with our colleagues, because I now know that Julie's kids decorate her backdrop. And so I shouldn't feel jealous that I can't have a new stage backdrop every day. But I now know more about Julie than I probably would have ever known had we not adapted to a new way of connecting and collaborating. And even with the level of humanity, when I'm seeing one of my colleagues having to care for their elderly grandparents and their parents and their kids, I've got a whole nother level of empathy of how I'm showing up when I'm like, hey, can I get? And I'm like, hey, figure it out when it works best for you. So I think as we start to explore this whole concept around mindset of what's going to drive and create more successful organizations that create inclusive, productive, and engaging cultures for us all. I mean, these are some really interesting components for us to work through. And on that note, as we think about the town, oh, Julie, you did ask me to talk about that article. And so let me not forget that article. And I don't know if you saw my eyes zigging and zagging. I was like, oh, I got to pull it up real quick. There was an article recently written and distributed by the good folks over at McKinsey, where let me pull it up again here, folks. And the title of the article is 6 Problem-Solving Mindsets for Very Uncertain Times. And I'll make sure that this, along with some other supporting materials, get posted in the HR Knowledge Center so that folks can have access to it. But we thought this was a really interesting article where they talked about 6 reinforcing mindsets for uncertain times. And I'll read them to you real quickly, but we'll make sure you get the link. And one was being ever curious about the element of your problem. Being an imperfectionist with a high tolerance for ambiguity, we'll slash that with adaptability, having a dragonfly eye view of the world to see through multiple lenses. I thought that, we all thought that was a dragonfly. So if you know a dragonfly, they've got, like, you know, a Minority Report, they've got multiple panels. I've got 3 here, they've got more than that. So imagine being able to have a perspective or a view into multiple things at given times from a dragonfly eye perspective. Pursuing occurrent behavior and restless experimenting. You've heard in the world of innovation, you know, fail fast and, you know, keep evolving and innovating and iterating. And then tapping into collective intelligence. That's one of my favorite ones, right? Even this webinar, how this came together, was us collectively crowdsourcing kind of how we wanted to shape this conversation and engage you in this discussion, right? So tapping into collective intelligence, acknowledging that the smartest people are not always in the room, right? And then the 6th one was practicing show and tell, recognizing storytelling begets action. And Christopher, that goes back to a point you brought up. And so clearly the collective intelligence, we know McKinsey is a great organization, but just with us, we have collective intelligence to even engage in this conversation and share with each of you things around the future of work and the talent mindset that we see forthcoming, evolving in the days to come. So I want to shift a little bit because we're talking to our colleagues who are responsible for HR and people and culture and employee experience and diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. Hey, my panel, what do you foresee or see in terms of the HR mindset to support at the organizational level, the level of accelerated rapid change, the evolving nature of the future of work? And then how do, you know, what are you seeing in terms of what we as HR professionals need to do to support this evolving talent mindset. But let's not forget too, what do we ourselves need as individual practitioners need to do? So that's a lot. We've got a few minutes and to talk here about that. Anybody want to jump in on that conversation?
Chris, I just wanted to mention, like, the collective intelligence. I think this is a big opportunity, right? Think about if we network better, not just, I remember years ago, we were all really protective of our teams and who, you know, spending time across the industry. And it's changed a lot. Like, we network across all the time, but we can do it a lot better. Like, imagine this past year, I saw it in like just crazy volumes, people reaching out from, you know, across and cable industry, but also outside, saying, hey, what are you guys doing? And this is not my IP. What am I doing to support COVID? Of course I'm sharing all this, right? Well, how are you dealing with learning? How are you changing comms? And we shared all the time. Sometimes we share daily, like, what are you guys doing? Like, what do you think? Did you try this one, try that? And I think that, you know, and on this call, all of you have access to each other and we can do a better job at connecting you. But if you're working on a learning program, like you're at Discovery, reach out and see what the Warner crew is doing at Cox. I mean, I think we all love to be asked for advice, but think about it, we're solving the same problems. And I do think that is a big differentiator with our group because we have this access, some of the greatest minds, I think, in the space. But the other bit is we need to think about is our people challenges, right? Because we're solving for a lot at the same time. And then, you know, I just think we need to revisit our programs and our tools all the time. So we might have some really cool internal program or benefit set up, but it may quickly age out depending on what the world and our employees need. I can talk about this stuff. I think there's so much real stuff we can do consuming business. I actually, hopefully we can send out my favorite link later, Chris, to Feedly. So setting up or curating your own news source. Like if you want to know more about, like set up your own sort of curated, and there's a couple of tools that do it, but it's like really getting your brain out your normal kind of learning path. I think it's a really cool thing. And then Chris, you can talk about this for days, but understanding analytics a lot better.
Yeah, the whole space of talent intelligence, as I like to call it, of really understanding not only how people feel about the experience, but hey, what matters most to them, right? In terms of how they work, when they work, what tools they need to empower them, and what kind of, you know, so it's going far beyond, excuse me, in terms of understanding the nature. And so I'm really excited because this is what we do, but I'm really excited to see the level of data and intelligence that our friends over in marketing and sales have always had in understanding consumers, that we as HR practitioners are getting far more skilled and equipped on using data and intelligence to help, you know, shape the future of work and develop and coach to this new talent mindset. So I'm super excited about that. Another call, another time, but anybody else want to jump in on this?
You know, I'll build on your question in there, Chris, about, so what does that mean for us as HR professionals, right? As we navigate what to the next normal looks like. And I think, you know, we have, as a profession, a lot of things that we do cyclically for our businesses, right? There's the season for pay and performance. There's the season for talent assessment. There's, you know, I mean, we are very much a BAU operator that is an essential piece of ensuring that our talent stays engaged, retained, and developed. But having said that, I think the challenge that's been put in front of all of us in this past year has been, how do we do that differently? Isn't it probably less about the steps of the process and more about the outcome? And perhaps it always was, but now without the opportunity to stroll by one's office or to pull people together in the blink of an eye and address things, we're having to be much more creative. And I call that the COVID silver lining. I really do think that that is one. We've really had to assess as all of these things have started to turn on the calendar. And dare I say, we're about to go through round 2, right? For March, most of us will reflect about a year that we had our workforce start to go remote. And it has given us the opportunity to say, why did we do it that way? And a lot of it is because we just historically had. And now we don't have all this historical trappings that we once did, that we say, how are we going to do it this time? And I think that's frankly a very grassroots way to innovation in our own HR space, and perhaps brings to the forefront our needs for technology that we were just skating by on. At least I'll speak to. It is certainly reprioritized having that technology in the absence of being able to do the kind of walk around way of gathering information. So, I mean, perhaps that's more a reflection, but also a call to action, I guess I would offer for each of us as we start to take the second turn on a calendar of cycled work. How are we going to do it different this go around? Because we are all still, for the most part, remote in our work locations.
Yeah, and it's interesting about, so the two pieces of that. So Chris, you talked about data, and Julie as well, from a storytelling perspective, and Karen talked about the advancement of technology. I had tools on my wish list, when I did the budget for 2020, and then all of a sudden those tools came to the forefront because they actually no longer became a wish list, they became a necessity. And so then you had to reshift the order of like where you were going to do. And obviously, in a pandemic, budgets then take the center stage, right? Because your business is being impacted. But then how do you invest during that time as well, when you had to reshuffle the deck and in order just to kind of meet the needs of the business? And so, and I think from a HR perspective, we've all been growing up in data and transparency of data. Like, we know that numbers make people feel comfortable. We're a feeling profession, but numbers make ground people. They make it feel transparent. It feels comfortable. They help plan. And so I find that from a HR professional perspective, that we don't want to be a bunch of data robots, but we also want to make sure, though, that we understand the story behind the data and what that actually means for our business, and what metrics and KPIs are important. There are always KPIs and metrics, at least from a talent acquisition perspective, that have been tried and true for years and years and years. You heard it every meeting: time to fill, offer acceptance rate. I can go down a list. But now then it's like, all right, well, where's the qualitative aspect of that KPI, and how do you actually measure that? What does that actually mean? And so it's forcing all of us to think about it a little bit differently. And so, so that's what I've seen from an HR professional, as far as like the pace of change and the adaptability, and then innovation without forgetting the fundamentals. Because, in this speed that we're all working in, there's sometimes that, maybe some of those fundamentals actually do apply here. Maybe we don't have to change everything. And so it's that balance of the two between fundamentals and innovation.
Christopher, good point here, because to kind of bring this together here. Yeah, clearly data and intelligence is very important, as well as enabling technology to help us get more efficient and more adaptable to meeting the needs of the employee, to deliver against, the evolving next normal employee experience, right? From a perspective of thinking about it from an HR mindset, right? I always look at it kind of from a three-legged stool, right? What do we know? Right. So what data and insights and intelligence, evidence-based things do we know? But you can't just, I always say you need all three legs to really get the most optimal decisions and engagement. Is, hey, what you know, what you feel, right? Because back to, we're sensing, feeling, that empathy and humanity, those are things we feel. But then what are the thoughts, right? What are we thinking? And so kind of thinking about it from a know, think, and feel, I think is really important for us as HR professionals, never to lead or over depend on one or the other, but to use all three as we start to think about the next normal around the future of work, the talent mindset, and even what we need for ourselves, I think are all important aspects. And the great thing is, Julie, you were talking about dating yourself. I'm not going to say how long I've been working, but this has been a fascinating ride and a great time to be alive, to see our profession really be able to take a leadership role in shaping the future of business, because people matter, right? And so I'm super excited and stoked about that, to be able to witness that in our time here. I'm mindful, because this team here, I can keep them on the line all day because we've got collective intelligence. And so, you know, we can go. But I also want to make sure that we save some time to answer some questions from the folks out there in the audience. And one of the, so Powell, if you're ready, I'm going to shift to a couple of Q&A that came in. Give me a second. Let me find it again. Let's see. Where did it go? Where did it go? This is from one of our participants here. I would love to hear some of the things you're doing to keep employees engaged. Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in. You know, honestly, we always toggle between, you know, programming too much stuff for employees and then being overwhelmed. There's a, oh my gosh, this is cool learning program. You know, what we did this past year is we opened up our learning programs to everybody. So all the stuff that you would have normally been nominated to or invited to, you're kind of, you can join in. And for some of our workers, that was amazing because they got to develop themselves and they had some free time. You know, COVID kind of hit everyone really different. Others, it made them really, it gave them a lot of anxiety and panic. They're like, I should go to this. I know I should be part of this. I want to be part of this, but I cannot balance that with my workload and my family, et cetera. And you know, we actually tried across the year, lots of things. We created new workplace groups, which is like the Facebook product we have at Discovery. Some of you guys have it, I know. We created new channels for people to collaborate with a group that might be similar, such as working parents. We've got a kids group, people, you know, pets group. We have people who are home alone together. And, you know, we did this because we wanted to foster connectivity and give people an opportunity to connect. What we didn't want to do is tell them what to do. So we opened up a lot of opportunity. And honestly, I still think some of this stuff is great. People love it. Some people are still really overwhelmed by it. But I do think there's a lot for us to still figure out. I do think that engagement is going to be a big topic this year when we look at kind of shifting work patterns and this concept of hybrid work versus fully remote versus on-site. Some people really want to work on-site. They don't like working at home. That's me today. I've got dogs and kids in the background, and I'm sure you're going to see one in a minute. But yeah, I love the question. I love the opportunity. And I also love having employees contribute in that conversation. Like, what do you want? Well-being has got to be a big one, right? Never before mental and physical health been so challenged, right? And the impacts of quarantine on our bodies and our minds, like we haven't even seen the full impact yet. People aren't even going to the doctors right now, right? So I do think this is going to be an opportunity for companies to really lean in. And we may see some more activities across, like some people do get fit together. Some people do not. I'm too embarrassed to, so I'll leave that to my colleagues, but I'm certainly here for it. But yeah, I mean, you know, Chris, I'd love to get your thoughts in this one too.
And I'll offer so much of what Julie said is I think we're all grappling with, right? It's about making things available versus the expectation that people have to follow through with those, like the training, the way that Julie described that. I think that's such a great idea. It's a mind, body, spirit sort of thing. And we have throughout the year, you know, if it's offering mindfulness or because we aren't on our campuses where we might have fitness facilities available, offering that via, you know, interactive or at least a digital experience because it can't be in person. And so it's trying to find what is the next best substitute, but not just around work tools, you know, improving your Microsoft Teams or the channels that you use to chat. That's one thing, but it really had to address the whole person. And that works for some people and some of those things don't get used by everyone, but it's that kind of menu of opportunity that affords keeping people engaged, I think.
All right.
Yeah. And, you know, just one more point on that is it's the balance of sharing. And so the balance of, I actually have the authority of my own calendar to block off this certain time. And so that everyone respects that window to say, you know what, maybe these meetings don't take place during this, or we find a different way to communicate and engage those priorities and the information there. And how do we actually share that? To things like, you know, just sharing, you know, the Calm app and the access to it, and then incorporating some of that where it's more of self-selection and not a mandate, so to speak. And so I have found the engagement go up when we are sharing different large and small ways of how we are moving throughout our day.
I'm going to jump through a few more questions here, try to get a few more in before we run out of time. And this question came in: as we move to more hybrid environments, how do we guard against in-person advantage, where people who have more face time with management may get more work or exposure? I'll throw that out. Who wants to grab that one?
I'll grab it quickly because this goes back to the snapback comment I offered early on. We can't come back into the office, even in a hybrid model, and go back to the way that we always did things. I mean, I think we have learned the equal playing field and the inclusiveness of everyone being on a screen together. And so I think there are some of those jewels that we don't want to lose, even when we have some people back in the office, because the flexibility of when people come and go, I think, is a real expectation now and a talent differentiator about who stays and who goes to the next company who will do that for you. So I think we're going to have to really revisit the way we used to do things, that we don't just go back to them, because otherwise you do have the haves and the have-nots, and the inclusiveness has to take the center stage about what you're trying to accomplish.
No, very good point, Karen. Thank you for that. All right, another jump ball coming. Do you see, another question rather, do you see any changes in educational requirements needed when joining the industry?
God, I hope moment. I've been like the odd thing, you know, college education required for these jobs. I'm challenged by that, right? I think I just got that my internet is unstable note, so sorry guys. I truly think that we're seeing a big shift, not just in leaders understanding that you don't necessarily need XYZ to do this job, right? So in talent, you know, people like kids, you know, kids who are facing at the cost and the time commitment versus, you know, they know how to hack knowledge. They know how to get knowledge really fast and learn it well. We were talking earlier about, you know, this concept of apprenticeships, right? Or fellowships, you know, it's learning on the job knowledge in the room. I think that's going to be going forward. But I think in the shorter term, I think we should be really thoughtful about what are we hiring? Someone's, you know, pedigree and education, or is it their brain and their skill set and their, you know, work ethic and their passion? And I know there's a lot of leaders, you know, regardless of what, you know, our teams may advise, that they're very set on, like, you know, they want to hire people who have that background, that they were successful. I'd love us all to challenge that.
Oh, good point. Let's see, where are we? Well, we've got less than a minute here to wrap up. So let me first say that there were some other questions. Sorry that we couldn't get to all of them. But I want to thank Karen, Christopher, and Julie for joining us today and sharing, and all of you for taking time out to join us for this webinar. And I'm trying to see, I think I was supposed to do, I got my note of what I was supposed to do here. I'm going to wrap up. I'm the worst with teleprompters, so just bear with me. All right, so in wrapping up and just saying thank you for joining us for the webinar and all of the C2HR sponsors. Please be on the lookout for future webinars and other points of opportunity to engage with C2HR. And remember to go out onto the HR Knowledge Center, where you'll see some artifacts and some links to some of the articles and books that we referenced in this webinar today. Wishing everybody a safe and enjoyable rest of the week, and be well.